Hey, devotional lineage healers, romper reglas, visionary leaders, mystical entrepreneurs. I'm realizing that in episode 3 of this season, I defined intimacy wounds and how relational strategies form, but then I never came back to tell you what exactly they were, what are the 5 intimacy wounds? So, such is my brain, we are going to get into it today. And before we do, I want to let you know that I have 3 one-on-one mentorships available, open to work with me through my program called Legacy. And Legacy is a 9-month mentorship for social impact, mission-driven, and spiritual entrepreneurs to unwind the deepest fear connected to our intimacy wounds that get in the way of getting visible online, of clearly sharing your story and your truth, attracting clients that are energetically aligned, and having a trusting relationship with money. It's really about building safety and trust in your body always. I know that you have medicine with which to impact the world, and I want to support you in doing so with your full humanity intact, your nervous system regulated, and your body open to receive wealth in all of its forms. And during our mentorship in the inner alchemy, right, the inner work, you'll receive repeatable trauma responsive practices to regulate your nervous system through all of the bumps and challenges of mission-led entrepreneurship, because there are always bumps. It's like a spiritual journey, right? You're going to deepen your your connection to intuition and divine guidance. You're going to establish energetic boundaries like a boss. You're going to remove shadowy obstacles to receiving, right? Because shadow work is part of the experience. It's probably the deepest part of the experience. You're going to meet your fears with attuned compassion. It really is not about getting rid of your fears or fucking your fears. It's about getting really close to them and intimate with them and letting them ride shotgun in the seat next to you as your spirit or your intuition holds on to the wheel. And again, creating safety and trust within your own energy system, right? At the base of your body, at your root, at your foundation. And Legacy includes 21 sessions with me where we'll work on supporting the trauma healing process with pleasure and devotion. And there's between session Voxer support. You also get membership to my online community, Revolutionary Romper Reglas, where you have access to all of my online courses, including Fiercely Expressed Leader, Own Your No, which is my course on energetic boundaries, and Sovereign, which is my 12-month course on healing intimacy wounds for energetic authority. And inside of the community, you also have access to additional support via bi-monthly group coaching calls, a monthly full moon movement event called Alchemize, and we have guest teachers and other teachings in the community. There's a book club and everything. So get on a free 30-minute curiosity call to see if it's an aligned fit for where you are right now in your entrepreneurial journey. And all the links are available in the show notes. And I really look forward to connecting with you. So here we go. The 5 intimacy strategies and gifts associated with them. I hope you're drinking some tea with me. I got my yerba mate. So the intimacy wounds and subsequent relational strategies I work with come from neuroaffective relational models that focus on the attachment nervous system, as well as personality theory. So it takes from those two disciplines. And then I combine that with somatic work that's steeped in both Tantra and energy medicine using the human energy field. So those are sort of all of the influences that are coming in that really make up my work. And to keep it really simple on this episode, I think of the framework I use as the Enneagram of intimacy, right? So instead of having like 10, it's collapsed into 5. So the strategies are 5, and it helps simplify things for me, at least. And what's really nice about this model is that it's compact and simple. We have all 5 strategies, but we have different degrees of them. And we tend to prefer rather 2 or 3 of them. And, I've been in situations or in sessions with people where I know that, with my therapist, we were in a session once and I was in a state of overwhelm, which is usually when these strategies kick in, and I could see myself going through all 5 strategies, right? So we'll employ the favorite one. And then if that doesn't work, we'll employ the second favorite one, and then the third and the fourth and the fifth. So these are ways that we manage fear and overwhelm in our system. And it's the framework, frankly, that I use to observe myself in my relationship behaviors. And it helps me clean up any of the stray energetics in my relationship communication, whether it's in my personal life or my professional life, with integrity and self-ownership, because it helps me get to the root of what's getting activated in any interaction. So it's basically like my meditation. I go throughout my day, I have interactions with people, I'm noticing what's arising. So that's how I move through my day. And you can't take responsibility for the energy you bring into relationships if you're not energy attuned, first of all, and if you don't understand or can't track your social nervous system. So if you want to learn more about how intimacy wounds form and how the relational strategies come in as a consequence, then go back and listen to episode 3, where I get into the interaction of intimacy in detail. And, again, just so that we're clear, you're most likely to use the energetic strategies when your nervous system is in overwhelm, when you're stressed, or when you're afraid. And when you look at the nervous system, and I'm not going to, nerd out on the nervous system, I'm just going to, the most basic. When you look at the options your nervous system has to respond to something or to react to something, there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and free, right? Free being safe and social. The other 4 are all fear-based. So there's only one that's not fear-based. And it just goes to show how primed our nervous systems are for danger, like how it really is there to keep us safe, and not safe in the way that allows you to be fully expressed in your creativity, but safe, like shut in safe, like not liberated safe. So just wanting to add also that your nervous system holds a lot of different histories, right? It holds your personal trauma, both shock trauma and these intimacy wounds, like the developmental trauma, as well as the trauma of your ancestors through epigenetics. Then there's the collective trauma, right? Which can be slavery or genocide or colonialism, but then it also has the trauma of, coming of age or just being steeped in the energy of systems of disempowerment, right? The conditioning of white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, for example. So what I want to offer you in sharing that is that, because the generation that's alive now, we are doing trauma healing that previous generations have not done. And, we experience so much maybe depression and anxiety and malaise, and there's so much shadow work happening right now because this is all coming through ancestry. Like this is all like we are carrying this on our backs, and we are the ones having to sort of wrangle with all of this. And so our nervous systems are spring loaded for fear. And becoming energy aware is being able to track your nervous system and your fear responses in your body. And that's really, really important is the tracking piece, like becoming a nervous system ninja. And at the end, after sharing the 5 relational strategies, I will share how I practice it in my own body and how I teach it to people. So the first energetic relational strategy is to leave. It's the leaving strategy. And in this strategy, there is a moving away from other people. There's a energetic fragmentation in the body. And it's a little bit hard for me to talk about these things because I experience them energetically. And, there's only so many words I could use to describe this process or describe how I experience them in my body or how I see them happening in other people. So hopefully you're with me on that. So the developmental stage for this strategy is prenatal to 6 months. And I want to highlight the positive aspects and gifts of each strategy because it's really what it's about. It's like we heal them so that the gifts can be expressed, right? So people in the leaving pattern or the leaving strategy, they're very sensitive to and aware of energy. They're creative, playful, joyful, and sensitive. Many empaths, right? Many empaths have the leaving strategy. Many empaths get really overwhelmed by being in crowds of people, right? And some of the difficulties that people in the leaving strategy have is being fully embodied, being grounded. People in the leaving strategy have difficulty feeling their emotions or allowing their emotions, allowing themselves to be fully human, right? Like allowing themselves to feel rage or anger, like the emotions that are maybe more taboo. They tend to be up in their heads. And I say they, but I always mean me. I have a lot of the leaving strategy. So I know this really well. Like I sort of like when I feel overwhelmed, I exit my body out of my left shoulder. And yeah, so we leave energetically. We leave our bodies. We need to leave or escape a situation physically. Sometimes we'll leave a party if we're feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes we limit the amount of contact. We shut other people out. And sometimes we leave energetically our own bodies. And so just in terms of painting a picture of the environment, like what the wound actually looks like. And this may be something that I share this because I want you to get a feeling for it in your own body. So this, I want to say that this might have like a trigger warning for some people as you're listening. So I want you to feel your feet on the ground, and I want you to take some extra breaths down into your hips, and maybe allow that breath to come into your feet. Right, just kind of notice what it feels like to receive some of this information into your system. So the typical parent maybe was ungrounded themselves. Maybe they were angry, maybe they were hostile, maybe they were ill and they couldn't attune to the child. Maybe they were insufficiently grounded. Maybe they were hospitalized for a long time. Maybe you came early, you were a preemie and you had to be in an incubator. Like all of these situations can create this strategy, right? Because they create situations of fear and overwhelm. So the wounding is energetic, and perhaps the environment or even the parent was perceived as hostile by the spirit or the child. And the wholeness of the energy, right? Because we are all whole, the wholeness of the energy got scattered in lots of different directions. And that's why I say fragmentation, it goes like, whoosh, right? And that is what I would feel in my body when I would walk into a party or a crowd of people. My energy would go shatter like glass. It would just break apart. So the default emotion is fear. And there is a general doubt around the right to exist, right, around the physical existence. And sometimes people in the leaving strategy don't take care of their bodies very well. They sort of deny their bodies. They find the experience of being human overwhelming, or they don't know how to do it. Sometimes they feel like, I don't even know how to do relationships. I don't know how to human. I don't know how to human. Sometimes they feel like they might fall apart and go crazy because of the overwhelming emotions. And because our nervous systems work in tandem with the ego, we have patterned thoughts that match what's happening in our nervous system. So when our nervous systems get overwhelmed with, in a specific way, Sometimes in the leaving strategy, we have this pattern thought of, I don't matter, or no one cares, right? So there's a disappearing of the self. And so even in an entrepreneurial way, that can show up as, my work doesn't matter, or why say anything, because it doesn't really matter if I say anything, or nobody really cares if I show up live today on Instagram or not, right? So that's how it can sneak its way into how you show up in your business, how you show up in your relationship, right? Like, what does it matter if I share my feelings in this partnership because they don't care? So it's like, it's the pattern thought, and you could see how it plays out in each domain, right? So the task of the person in a leaving strategy is to practice embodiment, to integrate the scattered energy and to individuate as a human. Okay. And that can happen in lots of different ways, that obviously movement, breath, vocalization, really allowing themselves to express the rage. I know that for me in this strategy, like, I didn't want to be human. I didn't even want to be here on earth for a while. And I really had to express my disdain for humanity and my anger for being put here, because that's how I felt. I was like, I was put here on earth and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. So that's a way of like moving the energy. And I remember the moment I dropped in, I was having this, I was driving, and I had this grief response of like this feeling of, I want to go home. I want to go home. And I knew that home was not here on earth. And that's when I felt myself finally drop into my pelvis. And I was like weeping. And it was really a really profound experience. But anyway, moving on to the second relational strategy. Okay, so the second relational strategy is the merging strategy. I love this strategy because so many people who are helpers in the world, who are like spiritual entrepreneurs or like mission-driven people or mission-led people, have this strategy. So I have a lot of respect for all of these. And for me, when I talk about the wounds, I never think of them as like pain points. I think of them as like, let's uncover the gifts. So in the merging strategy, we move towards others. We tend to want to blend with others, right? Just like we want to merge. And the developmental stage is somewhere between 6 months to 2 years. And other people say birth to 1 year. Like different people say different things about the developmental stage. But the positive aspects and gifts are that people in the merging strategy are caring, they're nurturing, they're loving, they have a great capacity for pleasure. And merging people are also really generous with their giving. And this is in a healed state, right? In a healed state, they are able to give abundantly from a sense of fullness, because as I'm going to share with you in a moment, there is the wound is of insufficiency. And so in a healed state, they feel sufficient, and that abundance flows from their sense of sufficiency. Their generosity flows from that place. And one thing that I want to say about the merging strategy that I really love is that, I feel like a lot of people in the polyamory world have this pattern, like they're such givers, and they are really able to hold the space for multiple relationships because they have so much to give. So I really think it's a beautiful thing. So one thing people in the merging strategy might have some difficulty with is with needs, really owning their needs, feeling their needs, expressing their needs. Some people, and you may relate to this, you may have difficulty receiving. You can give really easily, right? But when you're sick and somebody offers to bring you soup, it can be a little like, I don't want to make people feel obligated. Like there's all sorts of about it. So there's a struggle in receiving, in being held, in accepting help and digesting what you receive. Like when you receive a compliment, does it slip off of you like Teflon, or are you able to really, really take it in? So in the merging strategy, when we're fearful or overwhelmed, we seek safety through merging and codependency. And merging people tend to get into relationships where they're the helper or they're being helped, right? It can go in either direction. And in this sort of home environment, how the wound forms is that the typical parent situation was maybe, intentionally depriving, which is not usually the case, but maybe they were like limited in terms of what they were able to give. And so the child, you remained sort of deprived. Maybe the parent was ill and was limited in their giving in that way. Maybe they were just neglectful because they had mental health issues. Maybe they were absent, for lots of different reasons. It could be work. It could be maybe they were imprisoned. Maybe, maybe they were in the army. Like it could be lots of different things. It doesn't need to be intentional. And my intention here is never to blame the parents, because I certainly am not a perfect parent and I wound my children for sure. So the wound here in the merging strategy it's physical and interpersonal. So it's relational for sure. All of them are relational, but this one in particular, because there is like a physical deprivation, like the child did not get full. The child did not receive enough nurturance and love. And the effect of the wound is that like there's a sense of insufficiency in the body. Like there's just like not enough. There's a feeling of emptiness, and maybe there's a neediness that's like covered up. Sometimes the person feels their need a lot and they're self-conscious about it. And sometimes that need is kind of buried and comes out sideways, which is sort of more of a shadowy kind of situation. And in the merging strategy, there's like the trigger, the activation is deprivation. And so when that deprivation gets activated, there can be an overindulgence in substances, right? Whether it's food, drugs, shopping, screen time, in an attempt to fill up, drinking even. And sometimes merging people project their own needs onto other people, and they identify as the giver while denying their own needs. And that was me. I used to do that. So I used to be like, oh, those people need help. That person needs help. But when I was like, what do I need? I don't need anything. I'm fine. Like I'm good. And so there was always that person is needy. That person needs that person, because I needed to feel like valuable and useful. That was the way I got my ego filled up. So there's this illusion around, if I need, I will be abandoned, because the experience of the child is of the needs having been too much for the parent. So the parent is kind of like, oh, they get overwhelmed. The child feels abandoned in that overwhelm. So there's a shame around needing. And I get the question a lot of like, are these needs legitimate? Is it okay for me to need? Right? So there's a doubt around your right to need, like that you are human and you have needs, and the right to have, like to really like take in, ingest and digest. So there's a fear of abandonment, rejection, deprivation, and there's a fear of not having enough of anything. And so again, how that plays out, obviously you can see how that plays out personally, but it also plays out professionally. Like if you feel like there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there's not enough clients, this is something that is living in you. It doesn't actually reflect reality. Sometimes, like the reality is that you are like, it is sufficient, you have enough, but you don't feel like you have enough because that's not the reality that you're experiencing inside of your body. So again, you can see how there's this feeling of scarcity can drive you to do things in your business, perhaps that that maybe aren't the most aligned choices. But if you're not aware of the insufficiency that you're carrying within you, then you can't attune to it and you can't do anything about it. So, and for the merging strategy, the healing is really about filling up with their own love. And I love working with merging people because the energy so goes outward. There's such an attunement to what's happening externally. They're externally referenced about like this person's needing, or even like this is the person who needs help in my business, right? Like even that, the mission, being led by a mission also has you going outward. But sometimes like we create businesses out of our own needs, out of like what we didn't get. And so that's part of the healing of the merging, is really like creating something that helps others in the ways that maybe we didn't get. But then we also have the second part of that equation, is that we also have to allow ourselves to receive in it. We have to allow ourselves to receive the fruits of this business that we're creating, or the relationship that we've cultivated. And in the merging strategy, it's just such a beautiful experience to have that energy that is so quickly directed out, to have that turned inward, to have the strength of that powerful love and generous love to be turned inward on the self. I find that to be so amazing. And that is the healing, to recognize that there is enough love. There is not just enough, but that is abundant, and that you can get filled up in your body. And I'll never forget the session I had with my energy teacher, where it was the first time that I felt filled up in my body. And I will never forget it, because I reference that moment all the time as like my new reality. When I feel like I'm in that place of insufficiency, I was like, no, actually, that's not real. I have an experience of sufficiency to counteract that pattern thought. Okay, so the third energetic relational strategy is the enduring strategy. In this energy, there's like the energy goes in and down, right? So it's like it's pulled back into the back body and it's pressed down towards the ground. So as you can imagine, or as you can even maybe feel as I'm talking about this, is that it's very buried. It's very hidden. But the positive aspect, or the gifts of the enduring strategy, is that people in the enduring pattern are really, really grounded. They have a ton of stamina. They are steady. They are patient. They have a long patience, and they're very diplomatic. So you want them around to support people. Like I think of them as like the trunks of a tree, like deeply rooted and very, very strong. And what they have difficulty with is with expressing themselves, with taking action, claiming their space, right? Because it's so hidden, expression feels super risky. And they seek safety through hiding the authentic self deep, deep, deep inside them, and resisting other people, right? People in the enduring strategy tend to turn their will against themselves. And this is sort of typically what we call sabotage, or self-sabotage. I think I want to be kind when I say that it is a nervous system experience of limitation. It's like a very narrow range of expression. And so when there's a bigger effort to express, there's a pulling back. So in the typical home environment, there was perhaps a parent who was intrusive. Think about a helicopter parent, or a parent who was dominating, who was authoritarian, who really didn't allow you or the child to be expressed, to allow them to have their no, right? To let them be who they are, essentially. And this wound is also interpersonal. The child or you may have felt invaded, humiliated, or punished simply for expressing their autonomy, right? Very simple. There's For example, it could be something as simple as, when a parent is feeding their child and the child doesn't want to eat it, the parent says, "Oh, eat it for mommy, eat it for mommy." And so the child, because they don't want to lose their parents' love, they eat the food. And so they have a no, they don't want to eat it, but then they swallow that no, literally, because they don't want to lose the love of the parent. So this is, again, a stupid, simple example. But then when you multiply that by 1,000, right, over the course of ages 0 to 6 or something, or, beyond that, obviously, because you live with your parents much longer than that, you can see how this can really solidify in the body energetically and even physically. So the effect of the wound is that the child or you can't control their own body or their own space, right? Because they feel invaded. They fear self-expression and taking action because they don't trust themselves. So they resist, they survive by resisting and hiding. And there's this because their no wasn't fully honored, they often say no in a way that is passive aggressive, that is hidden. And they often feel caught externally, right? They have they feel like, oh, I have to work. They feel obligated to do things. They feel like they're pushed to do things, but the double bind is actually internal, right? Because they're pushing down, or they're pushing themselves. They're negating themselves in some way. And oftentimes the people in the enduring strategy, they think that they're trying to please people, well, I'm trying to please you, and I'm trying to please you. And then they feel angry because they feel resentment because they're not honoring their authentic self, their authentic expression, but they feel guilty when they do. And they doubt their right to be autonomous, so they seek approval. And they also fear being invaded again. They fear being humiliated, or they fear being controlled. So the way the ego tends to play, they tend to read people trying to control them when that's not necessarily what's happening, or there's a feeling of having to hold it all, right? And so there's, in the personal life, that could be your relationship with work, perhaps. Maybe you feel like you have to hold it all at work, or maybe you feel like you can't express yourself freely at work, and then you are resentful. But it really is about approving of yourself, right? So the task for the person in the enduring strategy is really to move their physical body, literally just to move it in a way that is free, in a way that isn't following some sort of script, to express the self, express themselves physically. Maybe it is artistically, and then acting from their own will, acting from their desire, acting from their impulse, honoring their impulses, right? Because their impulses were squashed, were held. Okay, so I'm going to get another drink of tea. And then we're going to hit the last two. So the fourth energetic relational strategy is the challenging strategy. And in this energy pulls up from the legs and hips into the chest and head. So, and there's also an outward movement of that energy, right? Where there's through the eyes, pulls up from the legs and the hips into the chest and head, and out through the eyes. So this developmental stage is around 2.5 to 4 years. And the positive aspects and gifts of this strategy is that people in the challenger strategy, they have big energy. They have a powerful will. They have a lot of charisma. People tend to think of them as natural leaders because they're really courageous. They're mentally strong. They're competent. They're resourceful. But they also have difficulty with trusting other people. They have some difficulty containing themselves because they tend to take up a lot of space sometimes. And they seek safety through power, right? They value power. They sometimes use power over. We all do this sometimes. And they reject their own needs. They reject their vulnerability. So they tend to idealize power, like I said, and they tend to dominate and control others. And we've seen, I'm sure that you've had someone at work that has been in this. Like we all have had that boss that was domineering or that was controlling. And, truthfully, when you think about the home environment of this pattern, or how this pattern forms, is that one parent was seductive, meaning that they made the child feel special, really cared for, and maybe there was like maybe an incestuous, emotionally incestuous relationship there. And then the other parent, usually same-sex parent, although I'm not really I don't do the whole gender sex thing. The other parent was authoritarian. So they cut the child down, or they expected them to be more than who they were. This is often a product of narcissistic parenting, right? So the wounding is deeply interpersonal again. And what I want you to appreciate is that, during a time of intense vulnerability, this child was left alone. This child did not have someone to support them. And so they had to will themselves to survive. They had to really go inward and pull from those inner resources. And so that is actually what helps them be so courageous, is that they had to bury their fear. They had to resource from within, which is what they then use to sort of navigate these scary situations. They're just like, no, we're going to do this. And so in that way, they can be leaders, but their task is also to be a leader with vulnerability, with humility, so they feel powerful, but they're also alone. They fear their vulnerability. They fear being betrayed. It's like a huge one, right? And so they cut off or they deny their own needs. And sometimes they act aggressively. Sometimes it comes out in an aggressive way. And so the illusion that they're in is like, it's just a matter of will. Like they throw their will into it, and they're just like, I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it, when I want to do it, right? They really go from that place instead of surrendering to what is, or surrendering to life circumstances, perhaps. And we see this all over in leadership. We see all types of leaders who are leading from a challenger strategy, who are not doing their healing work, and who use power over dynamics, who are aggressive, right? And are not connected to their hearts and not connected to their own vulnerability, which, again, if you're not connected to your own vulnerability, you can't connect to other people's vulnerability, right? You're not going to be really tuned into them. So the default emotion is anger. And there's a fear of trusting others. There's a doubt around their own capacity to feel safe in their bodies, right? Which is always like why the energy is coming out of the eyes. They're scanning their environment because they fear they fear being betrayed. They fear weakness. They fear being dominated. They fear betrayal. And they have really difficulty trusting and letting go. So some of the ways the thought patterns can go is like, I can and I will, or my way, or you're not enough, right? This is like when we get into this critical place, and sometimes we turn it on ourselves, right? We are critical with ourselves. We demand that we do better, that we're not enough, right? That we do more. So this can be an internal experience as well as an external experience with our partners, right? We let our partners know that they're not enough. They're not doing it right. And and so that's how it plays out in the personal sphere, and we certainly see it how it plays out in the entrepreneurial space, where, maybe you're the CEO of your business, and you have people that you work with, and you want them to do things your way, and they're not doing it, and you get angry when they don't, and all of these nuances. So on to the fifth and last energetic relational strategy, and that is the rigid strategy. So in this strategy, the energy is constricted. So I'm doing this with my hand, sort of like crunching my hand, because I want you to imagine that, if energy is freely expressed, it's sort of like imagine it sort of as a spark, right? Almost like a star-shaped spark. And in the rigid strategy, I want you to imagine that the points of that star are pulled in and constricted within a mesh, like a metal mesh, egg shape. So, right, although the points of the stars are really sort of pulled in and constricted. That's how I see it. So the developmental stage of this strategy is between 3.5 and 5 years. And so the positive aspects and gifts of this strategy is that, people in the rigid strategy really appreciate beauty. They create order, form, and structure in everything that they do. So they really have an appreciation for the law, for example, or for rules, or they're high achievers, and they're highly functional people. I call this the wound of white supremacy. And I don't mean that in a joking way. I mean that in like a real, like there's a heart pelvic split. And because we all grow up in the soup of white supremacy, the rigid strategy is the one that is the most, let's say, popular, the one that is most widespread, the one that we really all have, like no matter what, no matter what race you are, we all have the rigid strategy. There is, the difficulty with people in the rigid is that there's a fear of feeling the emotions all the way, fear of feeling, a fear of trusting yourself. And like, don't we all lack trust in ourselves at some time? And we seek safety through containing ourselves, correcting ourselves. We cut off our spontaneous expression, right? We control our experiences by referencing the rules instead of ourselves. Like we're saying, like, is this appropriate? Can I do this? Is this right? So in that way, we really don't trust our spontaneous humanity to be expressed. And, again, thinking about this in a business context, I think about like showing up on video, for example. We don't allow ourselves to make mistakes, or we make a blunder and then we like try to do the video over again, or we don't want to show that we don't know something. We want to look professional, right? So we rigidify how we show up. And we become sort of in the process, we become less relatable, less human. So the typical parent in the home environment was maybe rule bound and valued function over feelings. This is, an example of a child who was maybe like praised, not for who they were, but for what they did, how they performed, whether the performance was helping, or whether the performance was piano, or whether the performance was school, or, academics, things like that. But this pattern can also arise from the opposite extreme. I don't want to say opposite, just a different scenario, one of chaos. Like people who grow up in households where there was a lot of mental illness, for example, or where there's just a chaotic environment, where there was little structure and very little emotional safety. Like the way that the child then copes with that chaos is to contain their own internal chaos by locking it up, by rigidifying. So that's also another way it can form. So the wound is interpersonal, but it's also spiritual. So the child was taught to ignore or distrust their inner experiences. Maybe they were gaslit, right? And to trust only outer rules and forms as a point of reference. So the effect of the wound is like this fear of the inner experience, and this is a strong disconnection from intuition. There's a fear of losing control if you feel your emotions. So there's a need to intellectualize, and they emphasize this order and this correctness, this performance and achieving. And the illusion, their false belief is that they are their performance. They don't really trust that they that who they are is really like the medicine. So the default emotion is criticism, judgment, blame. There's this feeling of like something's not right, I'm not right, you're not right. So there's always looking for the gap, looking for what's missing. And they doubt their own right to feel their emotions, the right to trust themselves. They fear chaos and disorder. They fear their own imperfection. So they fear criticism. So they limit, they get into perfectionism. And there's the fear of surrendering to feelings. So the pattern thought is something is wrong, someone is to blame, right? And their task, their spiritual part of their healing task, is to feel and value their own inner experience. And so what I want to say around these five wounds and the strategies and the gifts is that these are constantly moving in your system. They're constantly moving. And most of our struggles with intimacy in our personal lives and in our businesses traces back to either collective trauma or these intimacy wounds. And if you can identify the narrative of the pattern thoughts or the story connected to whatever fear is coming up or the hurt, you can decide how you want to respond to them. So these come out mostly during stress and overwhelm, right? When our nervous systems are regulated, then we're not as susceptible to them. But when we're stressed, it's harder for us to observe them. It's easier for us to get caught up in them. It's harder for us to slow down. So the key is to track them, to track them like a skilled dom tracks her sub. So remember that your nervous system is always, always, always tracking for safety, right? Your nervous system is like the quiet hum in the background of all of your experiences, all of your interactions. And so you really have to be able to slow down and tune in to that nervous system channel, so to speak, to be able to listen to what's happening and where you're feeling the fear in your body and what about. So when I get activated, which I do get activated quite a bit, not as often as I used to, and definitely not as intensely, I use embodied relational presencing to get clear as to what's happening and also to meet whatever part is getting activated. So it begins with sort of that curiosity, like, okay, I'm feeling activated. Instead of like going out there and like aiming for the kill, I get curious as to what's happening inside. It's kind of like, okay, let me go inward. And so I take some breath, I breathe space to the place in my body where I feel the activation. And I begin this process of compassionate self-inquiry, of really asking, like, what is it that I need right now? And really listening to that body part or listening to the activation to see what it needs, how it wants me to respond. And then I take aligned action. I respond based on what came, right? What came in through the listening. So basically, you're tracking fear and you turn inward. You notice the activation and the charge in your body, and you ask, what's the fear? Like, what am I, right? What am I reacting to? And you turn towards it from the space of attuned presence, like really creating the space to feel the need underneath the fear. So oftentimes we usually meet fear with avoidance because feeling fear in its undistilled form is so fucking uncomfortable. It is so incredibly uncomfortable. But paradoxically, when we're able to tune into the fear or attune to it, it tends to dissolve. And we don't need to feel all of the fear all at once, but we can feel a little bit of the fear, and your nervous system settles when we're able to meet the fear, when we are able to acknowledge it and not have it take over our whole experience, but allow it, again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, to sit next to you in the passenger seat while your higher self or your mission-driven self is at the wheel. So I really hope this was helpful. I really welcome your questions because these 5 strategies are so integrated into my body in terms of like the knowledge of them. Sometimes I don't know if I'm sharing enough, but it's really so much more complex than what I'm able to really offer you in a podcast. And this is a longer one this time, a longer episode. So I really wanted to limit it. But there's so much more that goes into the experience of these wounds. This was just the tip of the iceberg. All right. Love you. See you next time.